All right, so let's make a formal introduction for our listeners. Good morning, Colin. My name is Claudio, and I'm calling you from Washington, D.C. From the studios in Fairfax City. We're very humble and grateful that Colin Bass accepted our invitation to our show. Colin, welcome to the show, man.
Oh, thank you very much, Claudio. It's a pleasure to be here.
Same here.
And it's good afternoon from me because
good afternoon for you.
I'm in the mountains in Wales, and
good for you, man. How's the weather down there nowadays?
It's a bit overcast.
Yeah.
So not as summery as it should be, but we're waiting for the sun. We're always waiting for the sun in Wales.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean. So usually I start with the same question for every guest. With the pandemic, the last 2 years we have living crazy time here in the United States. Over 1 million folks die, unfortunately. We had a crazy president that didn't believe in vaccine or stuff like that. So how the pandemic affected you, your family, your sanity, your inability to tour, and how you hold it up, man?
Well, as I was just telling you, one of my here in Wales, I've kind of in the last 10 years, I've kind of discovered certain other aspects of living that I am interested in. And it's been quite good during the last few years because, I mean, we run a small farm here, and we have some animals, and we grow stuff. And also 6 years ago, we bought a little shop in the town down a couple of miles from here. And we turned it into this health food shop, so you can get organic veg and vitamins and stuff. But we stock a wide range of things, but mainly we concentrate on food because that's the way to health, is to eat well. So and we started that, and it's become quite a success. So this is a lot of work, but now we employ people, and it's grown in that way. And during the pandemic, funnily enough, I mean, here they had a lockdown, and it was like only essential workers allowed to, and we were essential workers because we're supplying food to people, So actually, then I started working in the shop quite a lot. And delivering to people who didn't want to, vulnerable people who didn't want to. And around here, everything is all spread out. It's very rural. So that was quite pleasant to drive through the countryside and then just have a distant chat with people who were feeling probably a bit isolated. And so different aspects of enjoyment of life came to the fore in the lockdown, funnily enough. And also our business was really going up because the people who actually came to the shop, they were coming in perhaps for the first time because they were sort of shopping locally, because mostly here people, they drive about 15 miles to the big supermarket or something like that. And that became a bit difficult, and people were queuing, and so people didn't want to do that. So they started going, we've got some shops locally. And I think that we've managed to maintain a lot of those customers because I think people discovered coming to a small shop and getting a personal service and getting having a chat, and all it's a thing that is disappearing. But we're trying to keep that alive. We tell all our staff, to always say hello and always, can I help? And when you go to the more impersonal life that we seem to be drifting towards in the big cities, is sort of, I think, detrimental to the spirit. And, so I was really happy to sort of discover this and discover that it's a really interesting world of getting to know people and also trying to encourage them and give them advice about healthy eating, because you suddenly realize with shock that not a lot of people know about this, and so my wife has started up a sort of an online business, sort of saying cooking without recipes, just cook healthy stuff, use up your old food. I can show you how to do this. It's called The Intuitive Cook, and that's going quite well. And yeah, so other things have come along. But meanwhile, I mean, I'm in my little studio. I've got my little log cabin in the near the house, and this is my little escape hatch. And I come in here, and and I'm working on lots of music. So actually, what with the increased business and doing the farm as well, this is something you have to do, get up early. But I find I'm working more than ever. And I've reached retirement age some time ago, but finally I'm managing to do some honest work.
But would your kids take over that, or I don't know if you have children?
No, I have a daughter, but she's at the moment they're living out in Indonesia. So yeah, if she comes over, I see her maybe once or twice a year. And I've got a grandson, and so, but no, it's just me and my wife here. So
somebody who take the business over to the next generation.
Well, maybe we'll see that, but I'm not planning on giving up anything at the moment.
No. Are you playing? So is music playing in the background?
Where?
No, in your shop.
In my shop, yes, I do. I have I program it all myself. Well, it's on shuffle, but it's like everything is. I enjoy choosing the music for that because
if you run out of ideas,
stuff. It's a mixture of stuff.
Ideas, you can use the radios, all the radios.
Yeah.
Play in the background. Were you born like in a musical family? I mean, how old were you when you perhaps took, I don't know, piano lessons or guitar lessons and stuff like
that? No, because I sort of grew up in a sort of working class family in South London. Yeah. And my mother was the youngest of 12 children. And so the musical background there was that occasionally we would, and at some point I was living when I was about 8 years old. My father died, and so we moved back to live with my mother's parents, my gran and granddad, and by which time they were quite old, and that was back in Wandsworth in South London. And every now and then there would be big parties. And because because I had so many aunts and uncles and cousins, so a lot of people would come to these parties. And there was a piano in the front room, and my granddad would play, sing-song things, and my mother then would play piano, sing-song things, and everybody in the family would sort of do a turn and sing a song, or everybody would sing together. And those are the kind of musical things that I remember, which was like just communal expressions of celebration and fun, so I didn't have any formal education, but I was obsessed with music. I didn't even realize that I was obsessed with music, but I was, when I was looking back. So, it was like, first of all, it was kind of, I don't know, when I was growing, I'm quite old, Claudio. So, I mean, when I was growing up in the 50s, when I first heard Elvis Presley, Buddy Holly, all those, and we had a little record player at home. And, those are my memories, listening over and over and over again to Peggy Sue and just listening to that. And so I became obsessed with music. And then, of course, early 60s, Beatles, the Stones, the Yardbirds, Eric Clapton. And, that decade was fantastic decade for music, of course. We're still listening to all that stuff. And, and that encompassed an incredible revolution, didn't it? That from the early Beatles and the beat group and the pop groups that gradually, and then they evolved into the creative explosion of the Beatles and the Stones in the middle 60s, and then the psychedelic years, and that was quite an amazing decade for music, and everything moved very fast. when you see the development of like the early Beatles to the breakup, you know, it's kind of like, wow, that's quite a career arc in 6 years, you know.
Absolutely, man. And when you were like in equivalent of here, the high school, you know, finishing, what kind of were you able to buy record? You will listen to the radio. How you acquire? How you develop a taste in music? How you?
Yeah, well, it was difficult because there wasn't much music radio in those days, you know. But then in the mid 60s, you had the pirate radios and things like that. And so I used to listen to a lot of the pirate radios. And then on Radio London, one of the ships that were broadcasting outside waters, outside the territorial waters, because that's the way that they couldn't get a license to operate, you know. So in the UK and be a commercial station, you weren't allowed to do that. So we had all these pirate radio ships. And one eye opener was in 67, you know, John Peel started broadcasting in the middle of the night. The Perfumed Garden was his program. And that's where I heard for the first time, like John Fahey, Leonard Cohen, all the psychedelic stuff. And you know, man, it was pretty cosmic, you know. And yeah,
good for you, man. So that you develop, and then so you were 18 at the time or so, and you have, well, music was very important to you, but you got any pressure from family say, no, go to college, man, forget about music, you're not going to make any money as a musician, you're going to be a hippie. Forget that nonsense. Go to university. Go to London. Study. Forget about the stuff.
No, I didn't really have any pressure because my mum was widowed and she was busy, and basically I've always been a bit of a dropout, Claudio, a bit of an outlier, because I think I was quite bright when I was a kid. I mean, you know, in England we had this thing, 11 plus. You had to pass an examination when you were 11 years old to decide whether you went to a grammar school, a posh school, or you went to an ordinary school, secondary modern school. And I passed this thing and I got a scholarship to some would-be posh school.
Yeah.
And really, I hated it, you know, all this, you know, and that's where you begin to see that, like, the class system that's endemic in British society. And so I didn't feel accepted in there either. And basically, I just sort of stopped going. And I left when I was 15, so no qualifications, nothing. But luckily, and I was wanting to get away from home, so I left home quite early, because then my mum remarried. I had a stepfather. I didn't get on with him. I left home when I was about 17. And,
you managed?
Well, my brother got me a job in a place where he was working, my older brother. And lucky, thank you, Dave. And so I worked. It was like the professional photographer boom. So I was working, developing photos and things like that. It was a really interesting thing to learn. And we had, high profile clients in my brother's firm. So, that was kind of interesting. And I was learning a trade, actually, for a couple of years. But, I was also saving my money and then buying a guitar. And, then answering an advertisement in one of the music papers, the Melody Maker, to join a group. And I joined a group as a guitarist, and called The Crisis, with a K.
Yep.
And within about, after a while, before I was 18, it was just like we went professional. I left my job. We all went and lived in a house. We had a manager, and we would travel up and down the UK, everywhere, sleeping in the van and eating chips. And, we wouldn't, I don't remember us actually ever really having any money, but somehow we managed to live, and we got a job, and you would drive up to the north of England for £15, you know, and so, but the great thing in those days was that this was before DJs took over local dances and things like this. Yeah. So there were lots of local venues, like little town halls or in little towns all over England, where, you know, they wanted a band for the night. You know, so most weekends we would work it Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and we would, and a lot of times you would get gigs as a support band, and then we started to be a support band for you know, we played with Pink Floyd, The Nice, The Move, the Arthur Brown, whatever. So. Bonzo Dog Doodah Band, fantastic. And yeah, so in those days there was kind of an interesting circuit of gigs that has completely disappeared now, whereby you could, so to speak, serve an apprenticeship.
Sure.
You know, by opening for big bands and seeing how they do it, and you know, learning your trade. So
was Led Zeppelin popular at the time, or
was what?
Was Led Zeppelin very popular at the time, or no?
Well, I remember when Led Zeppelin started, you know, and saw them at the Fishmonger's Arms in Wood Green, a pub, in a hall in the back of a pub, and they were billed as the New Yardbirds.
Yeah.
That's just before they got their Led Zeppelin name. And yeah, it was phenomenal. So, you know, the first album, I loved it, you know, and it was, yeah, it was really
man, you opened some show for them. Unbelievable, man. Unbelievable. You know, I have seen we never got to the bands in my life, and never Led Zeppelin together, never Pink Floyd together, never Genesis together with Peter Gabriel. Of course, I have seen individual member of all these bands and Genesis like 10 times, but man, that's what you know. That's, in my opinion, that in the history of music, according to me, those are the top three bands: Led Zeppelin, Genesis, and Pink Floyd. By far, you know. I
think we supported Pink Floyd at the Imperial College in London, and it was one of the first gigs that Dave Gilmour did.
My God, man! Right?
Yeah.
So you start making a little bit of money. So didn't your brother phone you up, or well, at the time we didn't have text for, hey, come back here to the photography shop. Forget about no. He said you're good to go. And
I was always left to my own devices, as we say.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I've been trying to survive ever since. You know.
Yeah. Well, you have done well, man. And then, so you were making a little bit of money, and then, so in that particular band, you know, how long will you guys stay there with the crisis before you went to clubs?
In the end, it wasn't sustainable, you know, because we never made it to be the top band. So, and we didn't really record. So, you know, that was it. And people had to earn some money. So, you know, there was a brief period where I went to work in another photo laboratory for about 6 months, but all the time looking for another band, you know. Because in those days you could buy the Melody Maker newspaper where all the news about the things went on, and in the back they had advertisements for musicians wanted, and I auditioned for Supertramp.
My God, man! Yeah, right.
Well, the two of them, you know, the two keyboard players. What are their names now? Roger and the other guy, and. Was in a little bedsit place in Earl's Court in London. So this was when they first were hanging around in London trying to get a record deal and things like that. And I think they had one record out on the A&M label, I think. But they were looking to put a whole band together. So I went along to this little bedsit and sat and played along. But obviously I didn't get the job. This Scottish guy called Dougie got the job, who I later met. Yeah, but and also I auditioned with Atomic Rooster, and just crazy things. Spooky Tooth, and of course I was a bit too young at the time, really, to really be a heavy player like that, So I didn't get that, but it was interesting to do that. And then I just got a job with a sort of a soul band who had a lot of hits in the 60s, the Foundations.
Yeah.
Baby Now That I Found You and all that. And so they were going out and doing the cabaret circuit around England. And so I joined them, and that was a real eye-opener, because it was a great, what we call dues paying, because we had a lot of work doing cabaret clubs, and you'd be in one town like Manchester for 5 days, and then on to Liverpool for 5 days, and you do all that. And these guys were just so great, and the guy who organized it, the trombonist and percussionist, Eric Allendale, is now dead, but he was kind of like a mentor to me. The Jamaican guy who was incredibly well read. He was an artist too, and he kept giving me books to read, and and then we spent a lot of time sort of jamming and things like that, and so really kind of honed my jamming chops there, and working with different people, like the flute player from Trinidad, just a kind of more international feel. And that was an eye-opener for me as a working class South London boy. It was sort of like getting into and becoming part of other ways of looking at things, musically, culturally, and so that was what I call my university, my education. So
Well, good for you, man. If you have gotten the gig with the job with Supertramp, your life would have been very, very different.
Yeah.
In a way, I don't know if maybe you were not ready, or I don't know if God exists. Maybe it wasn't the path for you, So I don't know. Looking back, maybe that was the best decision, I don't know.
It is what it is. It wasn't up to me. So, I was just trying for a job, but I think it was a bit premature on my part, but I was ambitious, So.
And then you joined Clancy, right? After that? Or?
Yeah, I joined Clancy, which was another international group, and that was a kind of, well, we had some different lineups at the beginning, but we were kind of part of that pub rock scene, although we were never really, not like Dr. Feelgood and people like that who came up through that, Brinsley Schwartz, but it was just a really good time, because there were loads of pubs suddenly to play in, and they were packed, and we got there were A&R guys coming around to sign acts up, and we signed with Island Records, and then we did some recording, and we didn't quite get on with Muff Wingwood. I don't know why, but because he was a really nice guy, but something in the band, whatever. And so they dropped us, after we'd had an advance, and then next week, the A&R guy from Warner Brothers was in the pub, and he signed us. So we ended up doing 2 albums with Warner Brothers. And then, that was the first time I'd sort of actually we started doing a bit of touring in Holland and Germany and stuff like that. So that was kind of opening up
So you were making some money at the time?
A world. No, not really. No, you get a record deal, but basically you've got to pay all that back, and they were actually, unusually for Warner Brothers, we were actually getting a kind of a stipend every month. They were trying that out to sort of, so that we'd be kind of like the house band, and so we were getting paid, Yeah, so we're getting paid. Well, I wouldn't say we were making lots of money. So I would say the record company was losing lots of money.
It was very hard to get gigs at the time. I mean, I don't know, the concept of a tour manager who book you 3 gigs in the UK, then you go to, I don't know, Holland or Germany, whatever. You did on your own, or the record label was doing that for you?
No, there was an agent who was
an agent. Yeah,
it was, I forget who that was, but there was an agent who was getting us gigs, you know. So
you were playing up to 3-4 nights a week, or
yeah, quite a lot, especially around the London pub scene.
Yeah,
but you know, we would go travel around. Yeah, it was kind of there was an interest in the sort of grassroots pub music, you know. So, and I really enjoyed all that, you know. And that's when I was getting into, I don't know, you started getting into, well, that was also a kind of an education. I think actually every group is an education. Every lineup you find yourself in, you always learn something. But with Clancy, because we ended up with Gasper Lawal, Nigerian percussionist, and he was a big influence on my life, really, because through him I learned a lot about Nigerian music and Fela Kuti and the big drum orchestras and things like that. Used to go around to his house and just sort of like, he would play you stuff, and then you would jam on he would hand out the percussion and we'd just jam. And you know, that was an education, and that sort of got me into other scenes around London, playing with musicians from Ghana and things like that. You just drifted into these worlds, because there's worlds within worlds in London, you know. And so that's towards the end of Clancy, I was doing that and playing on Gasper's solo albums that he did. He did 2 great solo albums, and I played on those. And then I got into another Ghanaian band, and then I met my friends from the Three Mustaphas 3. That was the next band that I was in, sort of busy.
Yeah, feel free to elaborate, because you can
actually,
somehow your wife drifted into an international kind of, I don't know, flavor.
Yeah. But actually, in between that, there was immediately after Clancy was Steve Hillage. Yeah,
Steve. Yeah, feel free to elaborate how you got the gig with the band. And...
Sure. Well, I mean, you know, it was just one of those serendipitous things, you know. It was, I got a call from somebody. I think it was actually Steve's manager, and he said, "Oh, I heard you, Clancy, have split up. That's a shame. I really like Clancy, you know, and all that." He says, "Well, Steve Hillage is looking for a bass player." In fact, he was putting a band together, because, you know, he'd done this album with Todd Rundgren called L.
Yep.
And basically he'd come back to London, and him and Miquette, they were sort of like obviously wondering what was happening next. And all of a sudden, this album suddenly entered the album charts. And so there was kind of like, whoa, where's the band? You know, and so Steve had to find a band in a hurry. And so I got the call, and said, go around, see Steve in Kensington somewhere. I went around his place where they were living. And he was a really nice guy. Steve is a very nice man. And, you know, he said, "Hi, man, come in," you know, and we just sat down and jammed.
Yeah.
He just played, and I just played. And he said, "Yeah, okay, that's good. We got Clive Bunker on drums, you know, and I'm just sorting out this keyboard player." And the keyboard player, Phil Hodge, was a guy who somebody in the record company knew, as you know, had a brother who was a keyboard player. So they were going, keyboard player. So they found this Phil Hodge, and Steve went, okay, and he got him a Moog and basically showed him how to do that, and he did a great job, you know. So and there was Basil Brooks on the very early sequencers and everything. So there was a lot of this very early sequencing going on. Basil and Miquette were both on these little, what are they called? These, I forget what they're called now, the little flat briefcase kind of sequencers that used to have, that set up all these arpeggios and loops and things. And yeah, so that was really a bit of an eye opener for me, because that was, you know, you got paid. I had to turn up for 3 weeks of rehearsal every day, and because we were going out on tour. And so it was like, and it's very complex material. There's a lot of time changes. There's a lot of pauses and stop and count for 19 and then come in, and then, you know, it's pretty tricky stuff. But, you know, I was kind of quite malleable. My mind was more malleable in those days, and so I just took to it and really enjoyed it. You know, I had nothing else in my life to concentrate on, so I was just doing it. And it was great. It was a real education. And Steve, although everybody looks at him and thinks he was some sort of pothead hippie, Steve, I think, was definitely at the time, and probably still is, one of the most focused people that I know. He knew exactly what he wanted, you know, and would sort of, you know, but would allow you some freedom. But, you know, he could very calmly and gently explain what he wants to do. And yeah, very focused character, and a very, very good guy to work for.
Good for you, man. And you were just touring.
We toured the UK. We toured in Europe. We did that thing in Germany, which you can still see on YouTube, the Rock Palace thing.
Oh, Rock Palace, yeah,
which was really strange.
Very famous show.
Yeah, but I don't think the audience really knew who we were at all. It was just, they were just there for the filming of some band, and so it wasn't like because it was shot in the afternoon or something, you know, at a school hall. So I don't know what that was all about, but you know, that's the gig we were performing at that time. We played around Europe, and we went to the States. We played in America. It was the first time I'd been to the US. And we were supporting the Electric Light Orchestra, like coast to coast in stadiums, you know. So we played, you know, the first gig I played in the US was the Forum in Los Angeles, then the Cow Palace in San Francisco, and then we were in the Cobo Hall in Detroit, and then we went down south, and then we were in the last gig, I think, was Madison Square Gardens. And there's quite a good bootleg available from that CD. I actually bought it. It's from the Madison Square Garden concert. It's
Do you ever play here in Washington D.C. around this area? No.
I don't remember.
No,
we played in a lot of places that I don't remember where we were.
What year are we talking about now? When you did the
76, 77.
I got you. Okay, that was obviously, yeah. So you were doing okay. I mean, you know, in all the venues that you mentioned, those are big venues. I mean,
yeah, it was a real eye opener.
Most of them, you know, and
yeah.
But wow, those are big names, man. Good for you, man. And then, so you, after the tour ended, of course, you joined Camel in '79. So what do you? So that ended in 76, 77.
77, yeah, and then I was playing. I was playing with a few different just gigs, you know, around town, and looking for a job. But then I played with my friend Jim Cuomo, who had also been involved a bit with Clancy. He produced a single for us and played on a couple of tracks. Saxophonist, extraordinary character who died about 4 years ago. And yes, extraordinary character, originally from Chicago, and played soprano sax, played domra, the little string instruments he used to play, and write really sort of wacky, strange songs. He was in a band called Spoils of War, and that their stuff now is quite sort of a cult in the old you know, the old vinyl scene, and you know, that they, and a band called Mormos, and he moved to France he was in France for a while playing with some French musicians, and yeah, he had a band. He was in London at the time, that's right, between the Hillage band and Camel, and him and his friend, who was a writer, they'd made this musical which was going to be performed at the Edinburgh Festival for a few days up in those days, which is a drama arts festival every year. It's quite big. And so that was, I did that, and there was a percussionist and a piano player called Ollie Marland, who later went on to become Tina Turner's keyboard player. Wow. Now lives in LA. I haven't spoken to him for years, but if he ever hears this, Ollie, I'm sorry. So, and so that was, and so we enjoyed playing together. So we had a little band called the Casual Band, and we played around, and you know, just small gigs and things like that. But it was that was also an educational experience, because Jim was such a genius, and you know, he could play blindfold chess with about 5 people and very rarely lose, you know. And he was kind of one of the first guys who started writing music in computer code. You know, when computers first started coming out and you first had the arcade games. And he now is known mostly for being the composer of the music, which he programmed in with numbers, for a famous old arcade game called Defender of the Realm. And so game freaks, they know that this is one of the first games, and his soundtrack is known to some complete freaks. And yeah, so he was a very interesting guy. And then he moved to Paris, and yeah, then I went off to join Camel, and I used to meet up.
Feel free to elaborate how you end up joining Camel. You went to an audition, or with your background experience?
Well, again, went for an audition, you know, of course, but it was, they were rehearsing in this place, in a barn in the countryside up in Norfolk. This was 79, and they had Kit Watkins, Jan Shellhouse, and it was Andy Ward, right. Andy Latimer. And they've been trying out bass players, and so it was their tour manager was my good friend, Laurie Small, and he'd also done some work for the Steve Hillage band as a tour manager. So basically, when it's just like Steve, they were really looking for a bass player, and somebody said, "Oh yeah, well there's you know, this Colin Bass bloke." Who they wouldn't know me from Adam, but you know, so and then, you know, so Laurie got in touch with me and said, you know, Camel are looking for a bass player, and you better get up to Norfolk, you know. And so they told me when to be there, and I bought a train ticket and went up there with my bass. And yeah, so, and they were all there, and they were playing an early version of Hymn to Her, I seem to remember. So I just kind of walked in, and they said, "Oh, hey, we'll plug in there," you know. So I plugged in, and I sort of made damn sure that I could follow this song. And, you know, and I was listening on my way in, you know, and then I was sort of like going, okay. And so I somehow managed to disciplined myself to actually play a pretty good version of it without having heard it before. And you know, bluffing really, but they seem to like that. And Andy always told me afterwards he really liked my tone, because he was, you know, they'd had before Richard Sinclair. And I think sometimes Andy sort of got a bit tired of Richard's really high register stuff and things like that. And so, I was definitely coming from a sort of a bass playing school that said, you occupy the bottom end and you supply the rhythm, the pulse, you supply, I'm not trying to be Jacko. I'm not trying to be, I'm trying to make the group knit together.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I can see, and the group is knitting together, but I can see my role for a bass guitar to fit in there, to fit in with everybody rather. And I think that's a useful thing to remember. It's useful lesson, I think, is that if you go in sort of trying to show what you can do, then somehow you're putting up a barrier. You're not actually going to connect as well as if you go in and listen and say, what can I do for the song?
Yeah,
I'm not trying to show how good I am. I'm just trying to make this song sound even better than it does already, and provide what it needs to look at the whole thing rather than just, oh yeah, I can play this, and I've got
I suppose, right? It's like when you get a job, me professional with a company, right? They hire you to do that, well, you need to get the job. So you need to, I'm doing what you tell me, but down the road, you can say, well, not only I can do your stuff, but I can provide this or that, provide new input for the next record or whatever, and they will be happy. But if you start like that, you will say, man, this guy's kind of complicated. We told them to play this kind of line, and he's not doing it. So maybe
that's right.
He's a good player, but he's not going to be part of a team, right?
And also they were looking for because they were going to go and record.
Yeah, right.
Pretty soon afterwards, and so I think they were probably getting a bit desperate. So
that's right.
So I just thought I want to show that I could be a trustworthy member of this team, And so luckily, and I assessed the situation correctly, and I got offered the job. So that was. But to me, this is just luck. I'd never really listened to Camel before then.
Camel was well known at the time. They have done. Before Yuraga, they won Mirage, like 4 or 5 albums before you joined 79. So they were kind of well known. In Europe. So By the way, you mentioned Jaco Pistorius. Have you ever met the guy? No.
Seen him play a few times. Yeah. So Weather Report a few times. Yeah. Well, genius. Just a incendiary genius.
Really? He was Pat Metheny always talk about Jaco at the beginning when Pat Metheny began. When he began putting his band together. And of course, I never met Jaco. I never seen Jaco, but I know he's like a legend, And I wonder why he was that good. I mean, he played differently. That you are a best player. He did a lot of stuff that was unknown, like Jimi Hendrix on guitar.
Yeah, he was. He had totally unique style. He had a totally unique sound.
Yeah.
And, it's one of those things, and he played a battered old basses, and these are big acoustic amps that they used to make. I had one. I got one after seeing Jacko when I was in Clancy, and, fantastic amp. And, but, basically it was all ragged stuff, but he could just make it sound sweet, because it's in the fingers.
Yeah.
It's in the fingers and the mind, He could probably make anything sound sweet, any old cheap instrument, So some people are like that. But he was just, his approach, was just totally out of the blue, So, and his tone, he had this, he invented that sound of the sort of slightly nasally, gritty, fretless sound,
Yeah,
that dexterity of finger work, but it's no good just being dexterous with your fingers. It's what you play when you're being dexterous. That's what's important. You see a lot of people who can play a lot of notes, but it's kind of not always as good because you go, yeah, well, okay, I don't need that many notes. I just need you to feel some expression.
Yeah.
of a physical or mathematical approach. I don't go for music like that. Some people do, but yeah. But that's why Andy and Camel is so great, because he's that's what I liked about the band as soon as I heard it. Was that he was not into being clever for the sake of it, although he could be. He was into creating a vibe, projecting an emotion. And which you do with very few notes. You can do with very few notes.
And then Richard Sinclair ended up joining Caravan, right? After you joined Camel, right? So yeah,
no, Richard Sinclair was in Caravan before he joined Camel.
Oh, I see.
He was one of the original members of Caravan.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah.
Well, good, man. What about all the story that you got, man? And if you look back in your years with Camel, can you say what's your favorite album of the one that you were involved with? Or?
Yeah, basically for me, I'm very proud of a couple of tracks on I Can See Your House From Here. And I really think Nude is a really good, underrated album. But for me, like Harbour of Tears is the one that I think is a kind of a masterpiece. It's of Andy's. It's just a fantastic piece of writing from start to finish.
Yeah. And
whereas some of the other tracks, some of the other albums have got, they may be more. Some tracks are standouts and some are kind of all right. But Harbour of Tears, the whole thing from start to finish, is just a wonderful, sustained piece of music. And I always enjoy it when we play excerpts from it. And when we did the tour to do that, what was it? The Coming of Age tour with Dave Stewart on the drums and Mickey Simmons. And was that tour? I can't remember. No, Mickey Simmons was later. I don't remember. But anyway, it may have been Mickey Simmons. I think it probably was. But, we were all playing. No, it was Foss. It was Foss. Foss Patterson. That's right. Yeah. Mickey Simmons did the Dust and Dreams tour. And which came before that. So another good album. I just like Harbour of Tears because Andy asked me to help him mix it. So we had a very fun time mixing that album. That was under, in trying situations because, what was it, 16? Was it 16? I think it was a 16-track Soundcraft desk and, the 2-inch tape, big reels of tape you've got to keep your eye on, and putting in loads of overdubs on tape where you've got several instruments on one track. And you've got to sort of like make sure you're there to adjust the sound. No automation, nothing. So it's all hands-on faders and getting ready for when the guitar replaces the vocal on that track, so that you can adjust quickly. And that was an interesting time learning how to mix something with. It was pretty good material, but pretty good the studio, but it wasn't as easy as it is today. With multiple tracks on Pro Tools and all this. But I think that it's better for it, because of that. You had to sort of really make decisions as you're mixing. Whereas, these days you mix and then you can try various different things. But you're working with a 2-inch tape. You can't just keep, editing that, and it doesn't work. So you've got to, for me, it's more of an organic process, And
you guys with Camel, you were playing everywhere. I mean, there was.
We did a lot of gigging, it was like when I first joined, it was sort of like we recorded I Can See Your House From Here, then it was out on tour.
Yeah.
And the next year, so you come back from tour at the beginning of the next year, and then in the middle of the next year, you were recording the next one. We were recording Nude in the summer of 80.
Yeah.
And then when that finished, you were kind of more or less just going out on tour again. And yeah.
Were you married at the time or no?
No.
Oh, yeah. Because it's very hard to, have a wife and kids if you go. The life of a musician it's not as glamorous as people would like to believe it is.
Yeah.
You're on the road for 3-4 months or whatever it is, or 6 months on different continents, different countries.
Yeah.
It's crazy,
Yeah. Well, that's, no, it's difficult. It's difficult to hold down a relationship, but I guess that depends on relationship and how you fit together. But anyway, that's another story.
Yeah. And then Andrew got sick, right? And you guys stopped as a band for...
No, Andy Ward got ill.
Oh, I got you.
So towards the end of the Nude tour, Andy was definitely kind of having trouble, Andy Ward.
Yeah.
And basically that was very distressing for everybody. Andy, we shared a flat together in London, and it was sort of like I didn't notice, I think, really, that he had some problems. I was the last one to notice, but Andy knew, and Andrew knew what was going on, really, or it was kind of like, it was going, oh gosh. And I was always kind of making excuses, I think, for Andy. But in the end, by the end of the tour, you could see Andy just somehow, he needed to stop. He needed to stop. And I think it was just kind of like a mental exhaustion. And so at the end of that tour, somewhere, the last gig was somewhere down in south of France, I think. And so we came, and at the time I was sort of had a French girlfriend who was in Paris. And so I got off the bus in Paris. And that was it. That was the last time I saw Andy for years, because he went back and sort of regrouped and had to deliver an album for Decca, and he did the Single Factor with Davy Payton and all the Abbey Road musicians. And I think that was good for him. He was trying to just to get away from it. It ended with some sort of like really bad vibes, at the end of the Nude tour. So anyway, I was kind of like a bit. That's why I probably didn't take all this seriously, and that's why I was one of the last to notice that Andy Ward was not very well, and I'm sorry to him for that, because I think I don't know what was wrong with me. Maybe I had my own issues. In fact, I've always had issues, Claudio, and if you've got
everybody does
6 hours, I can sit here and tell you about them. But
everybody does. That's being a human being. Whether you are a musician or a medical doctor, it's completely relevant. The psychological issues. Getting along with a band, getting along with 5 people. Sometimes I have fight with my wife too. We live in the same house. I never mind going on tour with 5 guys for 4 months in different countries,
Yeah.
People.
So I got off the bus in Paris, and my friend Jim Cuomo was living there. He just had a deal to do a solo album for CBS in France. And he said, hey, come on. And so I ended up at least getting some work in Paris.
Yeah.
I got off with my 2 basses and a suitcase, and that was it. And so I spent about 6 months in Paris, and I did some recording with Gabriel Yacoub, who's brilliant, sort of folk rock guy, who was in a band called Malian in France. He's really good. He's still playing and writing beautiful songs, and but that never got released. So I don't know, had some things that I'd recorded, and then I got an uncredited release on some other album, but I even forgot to put my name on and things like that. So just these things. And okay. But in the end, I think I sort of ran out of money and had to go back to England and sort of start trying to find some work. And so because I'd used up all my contacts in Paris, so yeah, so I came back, and eventually I sort of I think that was afterwards. Oh yeah, no, I was sort of playing around in some pubs and clubs in London,
yeah,
with various lineups, and then after Andy had done Stationary Traveller, he rang me up and said, long time no see, I'll come round to see you, you know. And so he came round and sort of, yeah, he said, would you, I don't know, maybe David Payton didn't want to do it, but he's asked me to do the tour, the Pressure Points tour, the Stationary Traveller promoting tour. So I did that with Chris Rainbow and Ton Sherpenzeel, too many people on stage. And yeah, so that was that, and that was. But then about the same time, I got involved with I was playing with an African band in London, Orchestra Jazeera, and two of the guys, which was Ben Mandelson and Nigel Watson, they were also playing in a band that I was in with Ollie Marland, said keyboard player, and his wife from Austin, Texas, JJ, and we were doing sort of what would you call it? You know, it was like southern classic rock, you know, and western swing, and R&B stuff like you know, Etta James numbers and things like this. So like some heavy, funky, sort of bluesy direction, and great players. At one point, including Keith Airy, who on guitar, who Don Airy, keyboard player's brother, and Keith has since played with loads of people, including Tom Jones, and I don't know, he's played with lots of people. And yeah, so there was always some gigs to be played and things like that. And but then I played with this Orchestra Jazeera, and yeah, that's right, Nigel and Ben were playing in this other band that I was in, and at the same time they were getting together this band called Three Mustaphas 3, which today would be considered, probably was even then by some people, I think it was considered totally politically incorrect. But you know, basically there was like 5, sometimes 6 very gifted musicians who were all specialized in certain areas of music from around the world. Like a couple were very specialized in music of the Balkans and traveled there and learned songs and could even speak some of the language. And so, and then Ben was also involved with a lot of East African music, and so, and basically Ben Mandelson was the mentor of the band, in a sense, musical mentor, because he would just send around lots of cassettes introducing you to stuff from, you know, like some obscure Colombian salsa to Turkish saz music, and to lots of African stuff, like the classic African stuff of 60s and 70s. It's a great time for Congolese music and things like that. And, you know, and that was another education, because then I learned very quickly about lots of different styles, especially Balkan music, especially the very soulful sounds of, you know, Albania and things like that. This is a heart-rending stuff. And So I suddenly sort of discovered all this, you know, panoply of music. And what we were trying to do in the band is actually learning to play these things in our own style. But we had some really gifted musicians who played piano, accordions, like the strange reed flutes, and